Hey there, everyone. It's me, Samuel Broden, and welcome to a brand new season of Honoring Childhood, the podcast, where we have candid and casual conversations on childhood. I am just so excited about all the amazing guests and conversations we're going to be having this season, and I can't wait for you to join us. So, what are you waiting for? Come on, let's go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Honoring Childhood, the podcast, where we have candid and casual conversations on childhood. I hope that y'all have been enjoying the opportunity to be able to watch the podcast as well as listen to it this season. It's definitely been a fun new adventure for me, so I hope that you're enjoying it. I am very excited about our conversation today. Today, we are joined by Christie Copley, and I am just so excited to have her on to have a little bit of a conversation with us. So, before we begin, I'll tell you just a little bit about Christie. She is the founder and director of the Garden Patch Play School in Southern California. She has been a play advocate in the field of early childhood education for 30 years. Christie's husband Troy helps her run their nonprofit nature based play school, which serves children from 6 weeks through first grade. She has two teenagers that also work at the school, and she strives to build a community that feels like family. She fights for children to have an authentic childhood filled with wonder and discovery, and works to educate parents and bring awareness to the importance of child led play. Welcome to the podcast, Christy.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you.
I am so glad to have you here and so excited for this conversation. If you want to just take a couple minutes, I kind of read the technical bio, but if you want to say a little bit about
Sure.
yourself for everyone.
Yes. Well, Samuel and I met back maybe 3 years ago or so at
Yeah.
a nature-based conference up in Oregon. Um, and I've been following you ever since. So I was really excited to have this opportunity to come on and talk about the importance of play. In Southern California in particular, I won't speak for across the nation, but I know it's happening everywhere. The push down on academics, early academics, the play deprivation, the nature deficit disorder that's happening in children is just becoming way too alarming. And, like I said, I've been in the field for 30 years, but it's changing at such a rapid pace. And I feel like now is the time that we really have to unify and make our voices be heard together and take back childhood for children. So
Yes.
that's what we've started. I was part of a program, a school for 10 years. And then the former director during COVID decided it was her time to step down. So at that point, that's when I kind of took over and we formed our nonprofit for the Garden Patch Play School. And, we're very fortunate to have almost 2 acres of land in Southern California. That's unheard of. But it's lined with oak trees. We have a huge sandbox, a big mud pit. We have a 60-year-old tortoise that roams the facility and chickens. And
Oh.
it's just a real chance for kids to be kids and, to follow their ideas and to play. And last year was our first year that we had a full-fledged kindergarten program. And to be honest, I was a little bit nervous about it. I've been a diehard play person for such a long time, and I just wasn't sure, how that transition would work. And it was just magical. It was just absolutely magical. We started with about 10 to 12 kids that would come, and they'd kind of have a little morning meeting in the beginning of the day and talk about, events and what was happening in their lives and give them a chance to, use their voice and talk about emotions. And then the teacher was able to break it up and, take two or three at a time to work on center-based learning of letters and numbers and all of those things. And but when it wasn't their turn to practice those skills, they were outside doing the
Hmm.
social and emotional work that, we know is so important for kids.
Yes.
And it just really opened my eyes that it could be a different way. It could be a
Hmm.
better way. And, the institutionalized learning of kindergarten. And now in California, they're taking the 4-year-olds and then soon the 3-year-olds. And,
Hmm.
everybody wants universal childcare. I think we can all agree that the childcare system is so broken and, families are really struggling financially to find quality programs. And
Hmm.
But I just have to say, even some of our Head Start programs, like the focus is so far driven from what the research tells us of
Hmm.
what children need. And I think a lot of times it's just that the parents aren't aware. And, we really need to unify the parents because that's how change will happen.
Yeah.
I think we've tried long enough for them to hear our voices. Um, but that's, in a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. I love that. And I think, it's interesting to me kind of to see this push down for more academic early learning s still happening and happening even more as we, even as the field changes and the research is telling us something different, we still see the majority thought behind early education is academic based. And I find that, I don't know, I just find that so interesting because at the same time, I feel like I'm seeing more and more schools who are, saying they're play based, or I'm seeing more and more kind of outdoor schools, all these kind of schools
Mhm.
I'm seeing more and more of, but we still have this overwhelming desire or push for that academic in early education, and like you said, going younger and younger and younger. And so i I don't know, I how do we continue to push the things that we know are right or that we know is the best experience for children when we have so much of that push down coming from around us, and then the families and the parents, right, they're wanting what's best, and they're thinking that's what's best because that's what the consensus has been. So how can we even begin to combat that?
Well, I think that it's, like I said, I feel like the parents are going to be a really driving force in it. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like they're going to have to be the ones that are, understanding more about child development and understanding what the research is showing. And it was funny, I was giving a tour the other day to a prospect family that was coming in to see our program. And she had some Waldorf experience, and
Mm-hmm.
our school is loosely based on a lot of different, a little Reggio, a little Waldorf, a little
Yeah,
Montessori,
yeah.
all the things blended together. But it was so interesting, and I had never thought about it, but she used the old adage of the tortoise and the hare. And she said, it's like this story has been around forever to teach us,
Mm-hmm.
however, the education system in particular are trying to produce all these hares that are,
Mm-hmm.
the quicker you learn it, the quicker you get it, and,
Yes.
getting ready for the next step and all of that. Whereas yet we know slow and steady, slow
Mm-hmm.
and steady is the way. And especially at this age,
Oh yeah.
Finland leads the world in education, and they don't start formal education until the age of 7. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that they base their education system on what ours used to look like, and it's just, kindergarten is the child's garden,
Yes.
and we've gotten so far removed from what that looks like. And I don't know if social media is the way nowadays, if
Mm-hmm.
we need to
Mm-hmm.
get some big celebrity names behind our
Mm-hmm.
movement. But I think, obviously I try to surround myself with like-minded individuals and educators, and, follow people like you and, Kristen and a bunch of other people that kind of
Mm-hmm.
support our mission. But yet I feel like we need to unify. I mean, I know that there's the IPA, the Play Association, but um, you know, I can't even tell you the last time I went to an NAEYC conference because they
Mm-hmm.
don't represent me.
Yes.
Like that's
Yes.
not even, I don't want to give them my money and be a member of their
Mm-hmm.
organization because I don't feel that what they're even promoting is right for
Mm-hmm.
children. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if we could form together, if, the Play Avengers, like we
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
form,
yeah.
some sort of association. And, through I feel like it's really, Bev Boss was such a huge mentor for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like her voice needs to still be heard. And, she used to say, look at all this gray hair. This makes people think I have experience and I know what I'm talking about. And I'm definitely following
Yeah.
in her footsteps, But I feel like the more that we can kind of rally together and I feel like the whole social media world is a bit of a trap for me personally. I
Mm-hmm.
feel
Mm-hmm.
like I tell myself, I need to spread the word, I need to post, I need to do all this stuff. And, but to be honest, I'd much rather be out making mud pies with my best
Yes.
friends, So
Yes.
that
Yes.
part of it is a little bit daunting, I think, for some older educators that,
Mm-hmm.
aren't quite into all of it, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's part of it,
Yeah.
using our social media voice and podcasts and things like
Mm-hmm.
that to kind of spread the word. But it's just kind of a misinformation of, I feel like parents just think the school system is going to do what's right by them. And I
Yes.
think we're
Yes.
finding that they're not in this case in
Yes.
particular. So, class sizes are through the roof, the use of screens and Chromebooks and,
Mm-hmm.
all of those kinds of things, the institutionalized, the bright lights and no outdoor time, it's
Mm-hmm.
just, it's out of control. And I think if parents don't know, they can't help make a change unless they're aware about it of it. So I think that's kind of the first step we need to figure out how to
Yeah. Yeah, for
tackle.
sure. And I find that to be, something I don't know, I've something that I've noticed for a long time, and it's families and, parents and the adults in these children's lives, they come to us and, they obviously want what's best, they want the best experience, but at the same time, 99% of them don't have the education and experience in the field that we do. And so they are going off of what they see on social media, what they
Mhm.
see their friends' kids are doing, or what their friends posting about their kids, or what they're seeing on Pinterest, or any of these kind of mainstream ideas about what education is. And that can make it really difficult because what the majority is that they see is going to be what they expect, is going to be what they think is the right way. And so it can
Well, and it's
be,
free.
yes, yes, that that the yes. So families struggling to afford quality care is a problem and is an issue that needs to be fixed. However, when we fix the issue by placing children in these spaces that are not uh the best for them, what's really the trade-off, right? Like, yes, it's free, yes, it's helping the families in that way, which is important, and accessibility is important, but we also need to make sure that what's accessible is good, is the right thing, because then what's the point of it?
Right. Our local community college has an apprenticeship program for early childhood, so we're trying to recruit new teachers and be a part of it. And our school is one of the employers for the apprentices that are going through the program, and but we're also joined and partnered with the Child Care Resource Center, which is again a lot of Head Start programs. And I
Mm-hmm.
just feel like sometimes even in our meetings amongst ourselves, I just have a hard time biting my tongue and sitting
Yeah.
on my hands. And I know that, they I'm truly a believer that it's really about the teacher. It's really about the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
connection. It's really about, one of my first jobs in early childhood was at Universal Studios at their child care center. And,
Mm.
they just had, you know, top of the line
Oh
everything.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Teachers could go through the catalog and I want this and I want that.
Uh-huh.
And, but I had such an amazing director that made such an impact on me and my career at that time. And she really explained that quality childcare can happen in a closet. It's not
Yeah.
about all of this stuff. It's
Yes.
really about following the child's lead and making a connection
Mm-hmm.
with them and helping them learn and grow in those ways. So, I think that that's kind of the issue too, is that if we can just kind of try to reach the teachers,
Yes.
and again, Bev Boss would say, starting in a corner, it's just about
Mm-hmm.
a little bit at a time and whatever. And that's the thing too. Like, I'm not, maybe the better way would be is to try to help the school
Mm-hmm.
system and
Mm-hmm.
try to help show them a better way and bring back a real garden for children and outdoor time. And um But I just feel like that's such a huge mountain to climb, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
almost more like instead of trying to climb that mountain, we need to find ways to build around the mountain and create more schools like mine and create, like you said, there's so many now forest schools popping up and the unschooling movement of
Mm-hmm,
homeschool.
mm-hmm,
And I do feel like parents are hopefully becoming more aware of other options that they might have and trying to do what's best. And my little school now, the parents want first grade, so we're going
mm-hmm.
to attempt to do that. And and I'm encouraging them to found a big school,
Mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm.
let's do it together, let's find a way. But even in these early years is when it's so crucial.
Yes.
I truly believe even if they can have this type of experience through third grade, even
Mm-hmm,
first grade
mm-hmm,
ideally, but seven is such a big changing time in a
mm-hmm,
child's life. And but it was funny, I was I can't remember the guy's name, but some person I was following, and he was talking about how play is just so gone from children's lives in all
mm-hmm,
aspects.
mm-hmm,
And he was talking about the movie The Sandlot and how
mm.
that's what baseball used to be like. And now baseball is travel league, and you have to go
Yep.
to these tournaments, and you have to,
Mm-hmm.
like, we've taken the fun of baseball away from
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
And it's just finding the joy in simplicity, and all of that kind of stuff has just completely been removed from
Mm-hmm.
childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And you know we just have to try to figure a way to bring it
Yeah.
back.
And, I think it's so interesting because I think it can seem like such a gigantic task, right? Because when we really get down to it, I feel like it's this systematic um thing that needs to be changed, right? The system of education is there to create compliant adults who can go out and,
Mm,
all of that, right? It's such a huge shift that needs to happen, but I think that idea of, it can start small, and that's where those powerful things can happen. I think that idea of starting with the teacher is so important too, because there's been many of my own teaching years where I was working in a program that was heavily academic based, or those were the skills that they were interested in. And it can be really frustrating when you're in a space like that and you don't feel connected to that. But there's still those opportunities for you to put those things into the children, even if there are things that have to be done that maybe aren't aligned with your own philosophy, right? And so I think being able to understand that is so important, that no matter where you are, no matter what type of program you're working in, you can still make these shifts and you can still make these changes. It doesn't have to be something where, well, I don't work in a program like that, so what can I possibly do, right? But the important part about our work is that connection with the children, right? It isn't about what materials we have or don't have, or what we have, what we're supposed to be doing or not. It's those moments that we're connected with the children. It's those moments of the experience that we're creating. So we can do these things, we can make those changes, even if we're in a space that is heavily academic centered or anything like that. And so I think that is it is a hard thing to remember, but I think it's an important thing to remember, because at least for me, a lot of the times I did feel like useless or hopeless, right? Helpless. What can I do? I'm the only teacher in this whole school that thinks this way, or whatever it may be. But it's in those moments that we have those experiences with the children, I think, that can really help to make those little shifts.
I agree completely. And I think that that's kind of part of the issue too, is that um as a society for a long time, I feel like we've been kind of brainwashed into not trusting ourselves and second
Mm-hmm.
guessing
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and all of
Mm-hmm.
those things. And I think that that is the biggest thing at the underlying point of this issue, is that we just have to trust the children, and
Yes.
trust ourselves. And the kids know what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of my favorite things about my job, is that year after year the kids change, but their play doesn't.
Yeah.
The play is always, we see the same threads of their play. We see the same things of, climbing and jumping off things.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
why do toddlers want to jump off the table 100 times? Like, that's schema play now. We know
Mm-hmm.
that because we've studied research and we understand. But parents don't understand,
Yeah.
so that's the part of it too. But we know to trust that the kids know what to do. He knows that this is forming connections in his brain, and he, all of those things. and
Mm-hmm.
and that's the part that I think is so hard. And getting back to, really trying to bring about more emotional awareness, and
Mm-hmm.
that type of learning for kids to understand, to be more in tune with their feelings. And all of these things that we were talking about before, all of the pre-academic stuff, if you teach a child to read at 4 and at 7, they can't differentiate by the third grade
Mm-hmm.
who learned to read first.
Mm-hmm.
Academically, they're completely evened out by the time they get to the third grade. But yet, the kids that were forced all of these early academics and this drill and kill mentality, and you have to do good to earn your star on the
Mm-hmm.
thing, to
Mm-hmm.
clip on the clip chart,
Yep.
all of those kinds of things. Like, what is happening later in life is these kids are having such social and emotional depression and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, and all of these issues. And it's like, if we started now,
Yes.
if we took that time that they're devoting to learning to count to 100 and learning their
Mm-hmm.
ABCs, if we took that time now to say, let's sit with that. How does
Yes.
that feel? What can
Yes.
we do when we feel this way? And, all of those types of conversations that we can be having with kids in these moments.
Mm-hmm.
Think of how we could, last night I was sitting on the couch and feeling really kind of doomsday. I
Mm-hmm.
try not to watch the news too much anymore,
Yeah,
but with
yeah, yeah.
everything happening right now, I feel like, oh, time to check
Mm-hmm.
in a little bit. But at the same time, part of me felt almost kind of inspired that, the world feels so crazy right now, maybe because people are standing up and saying enough.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Enough.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to do this anymore. We're taking back, what we believe is right. And, you know, and that feels messy,
Yeah.
and I think that that's what's scary for people is the messy.
Yes.
And sometimes you just have to ride through the messy,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
I'm not a believer in putting smocks on kids. Like, we're just going to
Yeah.
fit through it, and then
Mm-hmm.
we'll,
Mm-hmm.
we'll, we'll clean up the mess afterwards. And, and have a more kind of holistic approach to what the world is like,
Yes.
but
Yes. And I think that's so interesting too because, we look at ourselves and the the adults that are around us and we notice that there's so many of these issues with regulating our emotions or understanding our emotions or advocating for ourselves and all of these things that we may struggle with, right? We may, we're going to therapy to work out these issues that we've dealt with, or we're learning about these things, why we behave this way. But when we think about it, like, let me think back to my childhood where there was no space for me to do that. When I was praised because I could count to 100 a year before everybody else. Or I was praised because I was, teacher's pet and I was the best listener and I was, all these different things. But I wasn't taught to speak up for myself. I wasn't taught to understand what my emotions mean or how to handle them in a positive way or, all these things. But it's like, but we're pushing the same things on children and expecting something different for them. So it's always very interesting for me to think about that because it's like, I mean, I see things all the time on social media, right? Oh, my 9-month old is reading or whatever it is, right? That we see. And it's this huge thing about, wow, yes, what a great job. The parents are great. The kid is so smart. This is this. And I'm just like, what is happening? Like, I don't know. I just find it very interesting because if we just reflected on like our own experiences, right? And thought about how we felt when we weren't able to clip something on that say we did a good job or we did feel embarrassed or ashamed because we were disciplined in front of everybody or even for myself, right? I was always the student who was the teacher's pet or who was, you know best in the class or whatever it was. And I always wore that as something so proud of myself. But as I've gotten older and realized, like, did that just mean I just kind of shut up and did what I was supposed to do and didn't say anything? Like, maybe that's not
Hmm.
really what we should be striving for ourselves or for the children. And so it's like, for me, I want them to have a different experience, but how can they have a different experience if we're doing the same thing over and over again?
Yeah, the people pleaser epidemic is real. You
Yes,
know, I think
yes,
especially, that generation of, we just wanted, you know, same teacher's pet,
yeah,
but also I think maybe that's why we wanted to become teachers. Like maybe we
yes,
knew back then,
yes, yes.
so but I totally agree. And I feel like that was something that, coming from my generation, and I had, I had a very fortunate upbringing, I was very lucky in that aspect, but grew up in the South. And,
Mm-hmm.
from time to time, I can remember one time I did get a spanking because I had left the front porch and, my dad didn't know where I was. And that was their generation,
Mm-hmm.
that was the
Mm-hmm.
way they did things for their, and I think that that's a lot of times where it comes from, is this place of fear and, not knowing if I do it another way, what will happen. Like
Yes,
this way I
yes.
know we'll get this kind of a result. And, I can remember from time to time with my own children, you know um my son was much more the people pleaser
Mm-hmm.
type firstborn type A
Oh, yep.
personality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then my daughter was the hellraiser,
Mm-hmm.
and she, I mean, and I can remember times where I could see my dad in a certain situation thinking like, she just needs a whooping,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah. Uh-huh.
you gotta, and I would have to stand firm in my decision. No, I'm gonna allow her to feel these feelings.
Mm-hmm.
It may make you uncomfortable, but we're gonna let her have, I think that was I'll get it wrong, but a Mr. Rogers thing that was something about like, instead of saying don't cry, I'm going to say I'll sit here with you while you
Uh-huh.
cry.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That is such an important point for families to know that, you know, just because it looks again messy right now as they're learning how to deal with these feelings, they're learning how to deal with these
Yes.
feelings. It
Yes.
takes practice, and
Yes.
and as adults we didn't always get the opportunity to have that practice,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why we're all in therapy. But
Yes.
you know
Yes.
and therapy is a good thing, but I'm just saying that if we took the time now to say,
Mm-hmm.
you know she's 5 or she's 4 or she's 7 or however
Mm-hmm.
old, and she's allowed to work through this right now. And obviously we're not going to let her harm herself or me or the
Mm-hmm.
property or those things. We're going to give her a safe place to work through these feelings, but really allowing it. And but I think that it comes from a place of fear, and parents
Yes.
don't, like you were saying, the Pinterest perfect families and Instagram
Mm-hmm.
making it look perfect. And we don't want my child to be the one that's having the meltdown at the party. And it's
Yes.
like, well,
Yes.
I have meltdowns.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is such a huge part of it too. It's that, I don't know, it's that idea of like, at least in my experience, the parents were always, are they up with everyone else? Are they behind? Are
Hmm.
they doing this? Or if they did have a meltdown or if they did have an outburst or something was happening that they needed support with, it was always looked at as like, oh God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened, or I'm sorry they did that. And it's like, we need to get rid of that kind of idea, right? And even, yeah, like even out in public, right? My brother, has a child now who's about to be 2. My brother-in-law has a child who's just turned 1, and so it's a lot of that too when we go out with them, right? Where there's this sort of like shame or fear of like, well, if they're having some sort of emotional reaction, well, no, 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 not here, no, 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 don't. And I'm like, all of these things are natural, and if we just allow them and help them work through these things, it's going to be so much better in the long run for them and for the world in general, right? To have a better, more grounded group of adults than, the ones that we happen to have now. and so I find that is interesting, right? And it's same thing for teachers too. At least for me, it was always like I don't want to be the teacher that has the quote unquote bad
Hmm.
classroom. I don't want to be the teacher that has the class that doesn't listen. I want to be the teacher who has all the kids that listen and all the kids that behave. And so it's this, I don't know if it's this fear of being looked at as like not good as a parent, not good as a teacher, this fear of what others are gonna think about. But so much of that, you're right, I think is rooted in that and in families as well, right? I don't want my family to look at me like I'm not doing the best
Hmm.
job, or they are like, well, you should be doing this, you should, all of that I think is is hard to overcome.
Well, and I think that a lot of it too, there's kind of this fine line between, you know, permissive parenting
Hmm, hmm.
and that having such a negative connotation of, and I think that sometimes what happens is parents will possibly overcompensate
Hmm,
if,
hmm.
they came from a very authoritarian parenting
Yes.
style and, they want to kind of go completely the opposite. And I'm not saying, I am believer kids do need boundaries. There are ways to allow them to have their feelings and all of those things, but that was kind of, I remember at one point, and one specific time that sticks out in my mind, we were going to my daughter's friend's birthday party and we were running late and we went in Walmart, and I was very clear, we're just going to pick up a present for
Hmm.
Sally and get on our way or whatever. And she saw some toy that she just had to have or
Yep.
whatever, and full blown meltdown in the middle of the aisle. And I just kind of wanted at one point to like have a button to put on my shirt, like, she's gonna be okay,
Yes,
we're gonna
yes,
be okay, like, we're
yes.
not getting the Barbie doll, we're getting a present and leaving the store. Sorry for the inconvenience to you, but I'm not gonna cave, I'm not gonna melt,
Yeah.
give into her meltdown, and all of those kinds of things. But it is, you get the looky loo parents, you get the people that are, you feel like they're judging you. And so
Hmm.
whenever I see situations like that, I always try to insert myself and say to the kid, "Oh, you're bummed. You really wanted to get
Yep.
that monster truck," like, that kind of thing, and try to tell the parent, like, hang in there, like, you got this,
Yes, yes,
because I
yes.
do think that that is such a big part of it,
Yeah.
is just to kind of um, be firm in your belief and stand your ground, and, let them have the meltdown if they need to
Yeah.
have the meltdown. They,
Yeah.
they will recover from it, but um,
Yeah. I mean, and that's so interesting too because, I always kind of dealt with that as a teacher of most of the adults around looking at me in the classroom and, oh, that's the wild classroom, you let the kids do whatever they want. They're not gonna respect you, they're not gonna listen. They just do whatever in there. And it was hard at first, but then it got to the point where it's like it's not about allowing them to do whatever they want. It's about teaching them that there's consequences to everything, positive or negative. We always talk about negative consequences, right? But every action has a consequence. And also, there's space in here for everything to happen. And there's space in here to work through everything. That's what it's about. And it's about having a safe space to do that, so that they can have an outburst or they can have a feeling and they can learn what it is and they can learn what to do with it and they can have a safe space to do that. And so I think, and I see that all the time too, when you're out in public, and I always try to, give like some sort of reassuring smile or nod or word of encouragement, because it can be, there's a lot of that shame that comes along with anything like that. And children are a part of our society. Children are a part of our world, just like we are. And that's just the way that it is. And, I don't know. I find it very interesting that we as adults struggle with emotional regulation, yet we expect children who have been here a much, much shorter time than us to somehow have the regulation that we don't have, or expect things of them that we don't expect of ourselves. right?
To
When
always have a good day. They're
always have a
always,
good day. When you're crying, it's okay. I'm like, if I'm
Mhm.
crying and someone comes up to me and
Mhm.
says it's okay, I'm gonna lose it because it's clearly not okay for
Really not.
whatever reason. And so I think it's all in this shift, right? It's just there's so many things to reflect on in our own experiences. And I get that too all the time, right? Where the parents will be like, "Well, that happened to me and I was fine. That happened to me and I'm great." And I'm like, "Okay,
Mhm.
but let's actually unpack that and figure out if you actually are great
Yeah.
because maybe not, right? But you didn't have space to really think about that and understand how did that actually make you feel? And what is it that you want your child to feel, right? So there's so much reflection, I think, to move past that worry of or that fear of what your child is going to be, what people are going to think, all of those things. It takes a concentrated effort to do that, but we just have to think about, what's the end goal? What do we want for these children?
Yeah.
Like I don't want them to have the same type of struggles that I had, but I have to be able to offer them something different if that's what I want.
Right. I mean, and I think that, you know, that's what we're striving to do. We're striving to
Mm-hmm.
honor who they are and honor their
Mm-hmm.
childhood and give them these authentic experiences and let them get to know who they are. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you don't give them this time and space when they're young, this is, again, back to the research, this is when we know 90% of their brain is going to form between 0 and 5. But yet, you know, we don't
Yep.
treat our teachers
Yes.
well. We don't,
Yes.
like all of those things are, constantly. And whether that's a part of our patriarchal
Mm-hmm.
society of
Mm-hmm.
not honoring, uh, whatever the case is.
Yes.
But again, I truly, and it's funny because when parents come to me, we're pretty fortunate, and it's surprising because I feel like for Southern California, especially the area where we live, it's a very affluent area, but
Mm-hmm.
it's again very academic driven. All of the early
Mm-hmm.
childhood programs really stress, getting ready for kindergarten and all of those kinds
Yes.
of things. And I feel like when parents find my program, part of me wants to say, like, well, how did you know? Like, how did
Yeah.
you know to
Yeah.
come here? How
Yeah.
did you know to trust your heart and to know? And I tell the parents, I'm a big believer in risky play for children. I think they need to have a zip line experience. They need
Mm-hmm.
to have
Mm-hmm.
all of those kinds of things. Um, but it's also, when I give the tour, I try to tell the parents, like, try to remember when you were a kid. Like,
Yeah.
where would you play here? Would you
Mm-hmm.
be at the sandbox? I would be in the playhouse with the baby dolls and the kitchen set. Like that was my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to get them to remember back, like what it was like for you and where would you spend your time. And then really just trying to honor that, you know, this is whatever drew you here, you know, trust that,
Yes.
listen to that
Yes.
gut instinct. But it's hard to know. I remember at one point I had a program. My sister owned a dance studio and I had started a camp through her dance studio for kids. And when we moved to a new location and we're going to build out and have a full-fledged preschool, and I took her to see Pacific Oaks is a college that has a
Mm-hmm.
great early childhood program, and very outdoorsy, naturey.
Yeah.
They're actually like three old houses that got converted into classrooms in a beautiful land. And and I remember her thinking, like, or she even said something to me like, it's just so dirty, like real dirt, like the
Yeah.
dirt,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she was like, kids were scooping the sand and and she was like, don't you want like primary colors and, a carpet with the ABCs? And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, no,
No.
that's the farthest thing from what I want.
Yes.
This is what it should be like for kids. But how some people think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
And some
Yeah.
people think, like, where does that connection come in? And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of my favorite movies is Parenthood with Steve Martin. I don't know if you remember
Yes.
that old movie.
Yes. Yes.
But at one point, I think the Keanu Reeves character says something like, you have to have a license to catch a fish and a license to drive a car, but they'll let any he says powerful, but
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
let anybody have
yeah.
a kid, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so true. Like,
Hmm.
I wish there was some sort of, you have your baby and here you have to attend this class.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
have to
yeah.
understand this little bit about child development. And again, so much of it, like you were saying earlier, is about healing our childhood
Yes.
before for the
Yes.
parents. The parents really need to, so at our school, we try to do a lot of parent potluck series where,
Yeah.
we'll just kind of sit around and one time in particular, typically I get a lot of moms that will come.
Yeah.
They're tired at the end of the day and they'll leave the dad at home or whatever. But
Yeah, yeah.
one time in particular, we provided childcare so both parents could
Mm.
come, and we had so many dads that showed up that, I mean, were completely vulnerable. A few of them
Yeah.
cried. Like, it was just this moment that we had together. And I was just so inspired. And I was like, especially I feel like for the dads, and they just want to fix their kid. They just
Yeah.
want to,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
like,
Uh-huh.
nope, we're not going to have this anymore. We're going to be
Mm-hmm.
done. I had one dad at one point be like, um, okay, oh, we're potty training. So he's going to be potty trained over the weekend, and he's not going to, we're not going to let him have any,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
just like,
yeah.
your 2 year old is going to, like, it's just sometimes important to kind of realize that a lot of the stuff that adults are putting on kids, like you said, is their own stuff that never kind
Yes.
of got hashed out,
Yes.
So I think that's a great starting point too. But it is, I feel like it's so driven by fear, and
Mm-hmm.
fear of
Mm-hmm.
parents not doing the right thing and not making the right choice. And, one of my families that was really pushing for us to have the kindergarten program, was very honest and said, she was part of her neighborhood, they all had kids the same age and they were all going to the
Mm-hmm.
public school kindergarten. And she was like, and to be honest, like, they really kind of made me feel bad about my choice, and
Mm.
kind of left me out of some of the things with the groups on the street because I
Mm-hmm.
was making this rebellious choice of having an alternative kindergarten program for her child.
Mm-hmm.
And and then as the year concluded and she was saying, reflecting back and talking to her neighbor and about her daughter's experience and what her daughter's experience was, and she was like, I'm so glad that I didn't let that fear,
Yes.
change my mind or,
Yes.
shape my decision more than she was like, I let it in, like I let
Mm-hmm.
it in
Mm-hmm.
there and it
Mm-hmm.
brewed around for a while. And she was like, but I'm so glad that I really trusted myself and knew this was what was best for my daughter. And I think that, you know, I applaud that parent. Like, how
Yeah.
do you get to that point? How do we help other parents? And again, I think it goes back to just awareness. I
Yes.
think that, for more and more people to just kind of know, I promise your child is going to learn how to count.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
at our school, it might be counting how many seeds we're going to plant in this
Yep.
pot,
Yep.
but it's still practicing those same skills. It's just not at a ditto sheet and it's out in the nature. And it's, like all of
Yes.
those things that it doesn't seem like it should be that hard. I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
understand.
No, I know. I say that all the time too. It's like all these things that you're wanting your child to learn that you're concerned about them learning, they're going to learn those things. And if they
Yeah.
need support in learning those things, they're going to get it. But right now, the things that we're helping them to understand about themselves are going to be those foundational things so that they can start to learn different things, right? We're going to help to make sure that they understand who they are, that they understand their emotions, that they know that they have a voice, that they feel confident, that they trust themselves. All these things that they need in order to do all the other things that life is going to require of them, both in childhood and into adulthood. So I yeah, I'm always saying that too. Like don't worry, they're going to learn those things, and just because they might not know them now or know them in the right way that you think now doesn't doesn't mean anything, you know. Um
Well,
but
and
yeah,
so much of it too is resiliency.
oh
I
yeah.
feel like this era of helicopter parent that's now snowplow parent that's,
Mhm.
like the kids are not even having opportunities to fail and to make
Yes.
mistakes and to
Yes.
learn that it's not the end of the world. I constantly try to tell my kids, you know, about the blip. Like, this is a blip in your
Mm-hmm.
life. This is a tiny little moment. Like, my daughter's stressing about, an AP test or
Yeah,
something. And
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
I'm 50 years old. I don't,
Yeah.
like it's such a small little part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't, but they don't have these opportunities to struggle and to fail. And when I was a kid, we would literally be out all day. We'd
Yep.
get out of school or on summer break, and we'd be on our bikes until the street light came on, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd be with the neighbor and the boy down the street and his
Yeah.
cousin, and
Yeah.
we'd be building ramps and forts and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, if we got into trouble, like, oh God, we didn't want the grown-ups to find out, like,
Mm-hmm.
how are we going
Mm-hmm.
to fix
Mm-hmm.
it? How are we going to take care of this problem? All those kinds of things, like, that builds resiliency in
Yes.
kids. And nowadays, like at my school, there's conflict. Like, they're
Yeah.
learning how to deal with
Yeah.
that. They're learning, but when they're all sitting at a center and they're all sitting at a desk, and you know, dot dot not a
Yeah.
lot with
Yeah.
your
Yeah. Yep.
glue,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
that's not teaching them, like, oh, heaven forbid all the glue comes out. That's not
Mm-hmm.
even allowed.
Yeah.
So how are
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
supposed to learn? And those are just the things that I feel like are so precious. And teaching them, like you were saying, to use your voice and ask for help, and
Yeah.
all of these things that are so valuable, um that we've just got to find a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. So I always like to end our podcast with like, I don't know, I guess like a random question that's sometimes for fun, sometimes just whatever, but I would be interested, what is one thing that you know about children and childhood now that you wish you would have known when you first got into the field?
um I think, again, it goes back to trust.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when I first got into the field, I was very eager, again, the people pleaser. I was
Yeah.
always, again, teacher's pet. If she had to leave the room, I would be the one
Oh yeah.
making sure
Yeah.
nobody was talking,
Yes,
like
yes,
all of those things.
yes.
So I felt like when I was an early on teacher, I had a lot to prove. I really
Mm-hmm.
wanted. And it's funny because I really aspired for admin, like I aspired to be. And now I'm like, oh God, take it
Yeah.
away.
Yes, yes, yes,
Let me
yes.
just be a teacher again.
Yes.
But then at one point I had a great co-teacher that, um, I was actually the director, so I was kind of her boss, but we taught together too.
Mm-hmm.
But she taught me so much. And at one point I remember she kind of would look at me and be like,
Yes.
you don't have to interject, like, just
Yes.
wait, like, sit and watch and see what's going to happen, and you're
Mm-hmm.
there to support when needed, but try to let them, it's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is definitely something, as I've gotten more gray hair, I've kind of learned
Yes.
to kind of sit back and just
Yeah.
trust and wait. And I feel like whenever we get new teachers that come on board now, it's really tricky because a lot of them have had any experience in, the kinder cares and
Yeah,
places like
yeah.
that, when they get to my school. And, when my husband first came on board, he used to endearingly call it the Lord of the Flies school
Yeah.
because, kids would have mud war paint and be
Yeah,
battling
yeah.
with each other, and all of those kinds of things. But, that's one of the things that I try to impart on the new teachers, is just to kind of sit back, like, just
Yeah.
watch and observe. And you'll feel it. It's definitely a feeling more than anything. So
Yes.
you got to trust those kids and trust yourself. And
I love that.
you know
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming today and having a conversation with me. I've loved it. And there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of things to think about, but it's always just so wonderful to know that there's other folks out there who are fighting this fight with us. So thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to let people know where they can see more about what you're doing or get in contact with you if they want to, talk some more?
For sure. Well, like I said, that is something I'm trying to be better about social media and all of that
Yes.
kind of stuff. But if you're interested, you can follow our school on Instagram at Garden Patch Play School. We also have a website with that name, gardenpatchplayschool.org. And yeah, I think we're again, trying to form a coalition of some sort to bring back the
Yes.
garden and, bring back childhood. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you and further our relationship. And,
Yes.
we'll get the Avengers together and,
Yes.
we'll keep fighting the good fight. So
Yes. I
thanks
love
for all
it.
you're doing,
I
Samuel.
love it. I love it. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening and watching this episode of Honoring Childhood, the podcast. And I will see you next week. Hi. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Honoring Childhood, the podcast. Make sure that you like and subscribe and leave me a comment down below to let me know what you thought about this episode. Make sure that you're also following the podcast wherever you may be listening. Also, be sure to check out my books and follow me over on Instagram at Honoring Childhood.